I'm May Evans. I'm the Carroll County Conservation District manager, and then Laura is here from Grafton, and I will let her introduce herself.
Wonderful. Like Janae said, I'm here from the Grafton County Conservation District, all the conservation districts. There are 10 across New Hampshire. We're here if you want to reach out. We're happy to put on events like this or connect, and just thank you for being here.
Yeah, we have two speakers today. We have Gabe Roxby. He is an NRCS State Forester, and then we have Charlotte Thompson from the UNH Cooperative Extension, and she's the Stewardship Outreach Program Manager. So with that, I'll turn it over to Gabe.
All right. Thank you for that intro. Can everyone hear me all right? And everybody can see the slides? Wonderful. All right. Well, hi everyone. Yeah, my name is Gabe Roxby. I work for U.S. Department of Agriculture through the Natural Resources Conservation Service. And I'm a forester for the state of New Hampshire. So I provide help and guidance to staff and others about forestry topics and projects. And so I was asked today to present a little bit about what Natural Resources Conservation Service, NRCS, some of the assistance that we can provide for specifically for invasives control. Previous webinars we're learning a lot about specific invasives and may have some questions about what resources are available to help control and manage those. And so I'm going to talk about what we can do at NRCS. So just a quick overview of what I'm going to go over is a couple of our financial assistance programs, who is eligible to apply for these programs, and then from our standpoint, what makes a good invasives control project, how to plan one, go over different methods of control, and then talk a little bit about if you do have interest in reaching out to us, how you can do that. So just a little bit of background about NRCS. We are a part of the U.S. Department of Agriculture. We are a non-regulatory agency funded through the Farm Bill. Folks can get in touch with us voluntarily and participate through our programs. We have 7 local field offices in New Hampshire, shown on the map here, and dots, and then a state office in Dover with the star. We do provide both financial and technical assistance for forest landowners and agricultural producers interested in conducting conservation activities. I'll be focusing mostly on invasives control today, but I do have a slide that sort of shows the breadth of a lot of the other stuff that we can help with. So yeah, financial and technical assistance. So we can, even if you're not seeking funding for or conservation work, we can provide just technical advice and assistance to landowners. Just a quick overview. We have 2 main financial assistance programs that would be relevant to this conversation, to invasives control, and there are Environmental Quality Incentives Program, EQIP, and our Conservation Stewardship Program, CSP. So just run through some of the basic parts of these programs and try to simplify them. They're pretty complex, and that's what staff really are really here to help landowners and producers work through, but I'll try to keep it simple tonight. So EQIP is meant to address existing resource concerns. So these are issues like, soil erosion, sedimentation in streams, or degraded forest land, those sort of things that are existing problems. EQIP is designed to help landowners fix those problems. Conservation Stewardship Program, on the other hand, is really meant for landowners that are already managing at a really pretty high level. So it's meant to help encourage maintaining that good level of stewardship and enhance it a little bit further. So maybe take it to that next level. The way that these programs run is a little bit different. EQIP, you apply for and sign up to complete specific practices, and then the payments, when you complete them, payments are made for those practices. CSP, there's additionally sort of an annual payment, which was meant at sort of recognizing that it takes time and money to upkeep land and keep it at a high level of stewardship. EQIP is really focused on the subset of land that has resource concerns. CSP, you have to enroll all of your land. And CSP they're all 5-year contracts, and EQIP, the contract length varies. It can actually be up to 10 years, but typically 3 to 5. You may hear me mention these acronyms throughout the presentation, so just wanted to go over them the upside. So who's eligible for these programs? Our programs are aimed at private forest land owners and agricultural producers. They're not aimed at residential homeowners with, for instance, invasives in their backyard. We're the U.S. Department of Agriculture, so we're really a best fit for folks that are producing an agricultural crop, of which forest products are one. So, we have a lot of resources, but we're really aimed at agricultural producers or private forest land owners. Public entities are not eligible. Way back in the day they were, but that has changed. It's really private owners that are eligible here. There are some income requirements. So if you have an adjusted gross income of higher than a certain threshold, you're not eligible for our programs. We often get asked if there's a minimum acreage to enroll. We do not have a minimum acreage. We're size neutral. And then just as a final umbrella here, all of the eligibility is actually determined through our sister agency, the Farm Service Agency. So we work with them to get folks enrolled and make sure they're eligible. And then NRCS takes it from there to work to develop conservation practices. So just soup to nuts, how does this process work? And why are public dollars being applied to this sort of thing? And the thinking is that benefits to natural resources, improving clean water, healthy soils, diverse wildlife habitats have benefits to us all. And there's benefits are realized by the public, and so that's the reason that we can put public dollars towards them. NRCS has a list of practices and practice numbers that can be used to fix natural resource issues. It's many, and there's lots of different variations. We set specifications for implementing each practice. We do work with the individual landowner. We get out on the land, really work with them at assess their goals, how they want to improve their land, and come up with a site-specific plan for implementing conservation work. And then if you're eligible and you wish to apply, you can apply, and you can be selected through a competitive process and voluntarily choose to sign a contract to complete those requested practices. So after you have a contract, actually in the process of applying, you work to develop specifics and make a plan to complete that work. And so after you do have that contract, you'll work with NRCS staff to make sure, since this is federal money, that you're in compliance with laws related to endangered species or cultural resources. And then the landowner is in charge of working with private contractors and professionals to get the work completed. NRCS comes out and looks at the work, makes sure it's done according to the plan and according to our specifications, and then we'll issue payment according to the contract that both NRCS and the landowner sign. So I mentioned NRCS splits the work we fund into different practices, and the primary practice that we use to treat invasives here in New Hampshire is our brush management practice. It's not specific to invasives, but a lot of the work we fund here in New Hampshire is invasive control. It is specific to woody vegetation, and it's really aimed at treating unwanted wood vegetation. It can be chemical treatment, it can be mechanical treatment, it can be, less commonly biological treatment. Oftentimes with really heavily invaded sites, a combination of two techniques is effective. Oftentimes a mechanical treatment compared with a chemical treatment. So we really, work with the landowner to determine, and also oftentimes if these projects are occurring in a forest, we'll work with the forester that the landowner is working with to come up with a plan that is going to be effective at controlling invasives and, restoring the site to a more desirable condition. In the forest, if we're doing invasive control in the forest, we do require a forest management plan exists prior to planning and completing this work. It's often the forest management plan that recommends the treatment schedule. Um, that plan needs to be written by a New Hampshire licensed forester. It's often more successful when invasive control is paired with other actions such as forest management that also are aimed at encouraging natives, because it's not just enough to knock back or kill the invasives. Really need to. That's not the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal is to have desirable native vegetation take its place. And so, what else are we doing besides treating the invasives? Are there other things we need to do? We need to get a better light level. Do we need to scarify the soil? Are there other changes in management that need to happen that we need to do to favor invasives? Favor native species. So it's really important from our standpoint, not to just treat invasives and then pat yourself on the back and say you're done. This is really a long-term plan, and oftentimes involves more things than just treating invasives. So from our standpoint, what makes a good project? Oftentimes it's that long-term effort and persistence. So our programs will allow up to 3 treatments on a given acre. And then after that, the expectation is that control lasts 10 years. Our practices have a lifespan. This one has this expectation is that the control lasts 10 years. So we're not able to fund invasive control on the same acre every year. The expectation is that it's successful and that it will last a period of time. We're really trying to focus staff and landowners on coming up with a really rigorous and effective long-term plan. It's likely to succeed. It's been our experience that herbicides are often essential to success, especially with heavy infestations. What we want to get people think about, what does success look like? Oftentimes, eradication is not really realistic, but controlling invasives to a level where the desirable native vegetation that you want to grow can be successful and take the site, that often is attainable. So thinking about why are the invasives there in the first place? Are you addressing that? And how can you encourage natives other ways? I just made up a couple sort of pretend projects that are good examples of the types of projects that we fund. These are not real at all. So I have this area here, where the area shown in red, area A, is sort of like a heavy concentration of invasives along a power line corridor and an old landing, and perhaps an area that really is not invaded at all, a forest that the invasives haven't creeped into. And so, this is an example of maybe a plan of attack that might be successful. In year 1, perhaps you do a chemical treatment with foliar and cut stump methods in these areas with existing invasives. And then a follow-up in 2 years to a spot treatment. And then perhaps in area B, your goal is to do some forestry. And so, prior to that forestry, you did some treatment of the nearby invasives. You do your timber harvest, and it's a shelter wood, and the goal is to regenerate oak and pine. But you've opened up the area, so it's possible that some of these invasives will come in. So you plan a chemical treatment of invasives in those harvest areas to make sure that your area that was originally free of invasives stays that way. We're not making it worse. And so for all of this, we're in the forest. This would, as mentioned, this will require a forest management plan done by a licensed forester. Harvest is marked by a forester and follows best management practices for erosion control. The herbicide treatment needs to be carried out by a licensed herbicide applicator. And we do have some requirements for how effective that is. The goal is a 90% control with each of these treatments. And it's selective. And if there's nearby natives, you're doing the applicator and the forester and landowner are working together to make sure that this is successful, treating what you want to knock back and not the natives. So another one sort of similar. Maybe you've got an old landing with invasives in area A, and it's heavy enough that the invasives are tall and doesn't make sense to spray them right away. So maybe you go in there with a forestry mulcher and cut that cut those stems back first before chemical treatment. And then the next year they sprout back, spray them, sort of a fairly heavy spray, and then you need another follow-up. So that's three treatments. We are permitted to do that with our programs. Um, and then, thinking about that long term, how are we going to prevent this site from going back to the way it was? Maybe we're going to be mowing annually in late fall. And so keep woody plants at bay and keep some of our woody invasives out of this and keep it more as a meadow. And maybe area B was recently harvested and does have some light invasives mixed with desirable trees. Probably a lighter treatment with maybe two chemical treatments. First one, a medium intensity, and that's sort of some follow-up. And then you're monitoring this area for success, and there might be need to upkeep that work to make sure it stays as the natives become established. Same requirements for this one for forest management plans and tree resistance. So just a couple more slides. Maybe wondering, how much funding do we provide for these activities? That is determined each year by a cost list, which is publicly available through our website. The rates and practices and specific types of the practice, the flavors of the practice, the both scenarios, those are set by a national NRCS office. These lists, the cost list and the rates change each year. This is not these are fixed. We call them incentive payments for the work. They're not really a cost share, so it's not that somebody does the work and we reimburse them a percentage of what they actually pay to do the work. It's a rate that's set and it's known before the landowner signs a contract, so they can determine if this is feasible for them, their situation. Mentions a competitive application process, and landowners should really be expecting to pay out of pocket for these things. Our rates generally do not cover the entire cost, especially of invasive control. And so that's something that folks should be aware of at the outset of embarking on a project like this. There will be costs. But part of what NRCS funding can provide is sort of a payment to defray some of those costs. So, I focused on invasives today, but I just wanted to put up a quick slide that shows the other types of things that NRCS assists farmers and agricultural producers with. Things like cover crops, hide tunnels, soil testing, forest management plans is a really common one, common first practice for working with NRCS and starting to think about how to manage a forest. Lots of other things. These are all designed to, benefit our natural resources and improve your land and it benefits the public. Staff are expected to be knowledgeable about all of these things. I'm focused. I'm fortunate I get to focus on forestry, and there's other folks like myself who focus on the other disciplines shown here, so agriculture, livestock, engineering, and wildlife. But most of our staff are expected to know a little bit about all of this stuff. And so we have generalists on staff and we have specialists on staff, and so we can help out a lot of situations. If you're interested in learning more, I'm happy to chat. We do accept applications for financial assistance year round. Reach out to your local field office and staff, and we're happy to do a site visit and talk more about options we can consider for your loans. These programs are sometimes complicated, and staff we're very accustomed to trying to explain these in plain language in a way that is understandable for folks that don't read federal policy and farm bills. So for sure, reach out and happy to help and do it for me.
This is not what I thought it was going to get.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Gabe. And well, now I guess we're going to move on to Charlotte. If you have any questions, please feel free to keep on putting them in the chat for the Q&A at the end.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Um, thanks, Gabe. I'm gonna kind of, I guess, a slightly different direction, but similar tact, thinking about how to actually help people do some invasive plant management on the ground. And one of those key strategies, is something the kind of realm I work in a lot, which is thinking about volunteers. So I'm really going to talk about engaging volunteers in invasive plant management for the next 20-ish minutes. With this idea like many hands make light work. Like volunteers can be a really important tool in the toolbox for thinking about invasive plant management. So as they introduced in the beginning, my name is Charlotte Thompson. I work for UNH Cooperative Extension. And so I'm based in Durham, New Hampshire, but I work statewide, helping communities and organizations across the state manage and engage people on conservation land. So there's kind of a couple of different buckets that I work in. So one of those is related to volunteering. You'll hear about a specific project that I work on a lot called Nature Groupie later on in the presentation, as well as um, things that have to do with managing conservation land. So that's where the invasive plant stuff comes in. And then I do some kind of work on some projects related to engaging people on that land. So stuff around accessible trails. So my goal with our like short 20 minutes together today is really to focus on this first part. So thinking about how can you provide meaningful volunteer opportunities as well as effective invasive plant management. Um, and I'm not going to really talk about invasive plant management strategies. Like hopefully you learned a little bit about that in a couple of previous webinars, or there's some like we can always point you to other resources, but really focusing on the top piece, thinking about engaging volunteers. And some of the ideas might seem like kind of general or simplistic, but there are like always things that I think about in terms of planning effective volunteer engagement. In my experience, I think invasive plant management can feel daunting and like overwhelming. But for volunteers, they can make some of the best volunteer engagement opportunities. And volunteers don't keep doing it because they didn't like invasive plant work days. It's because something didn't go well in the volunteer engagement side. And so that's where I'm hoping to help you with a little bit today. I wanted to start kind of laying the groundwork with this framework, thinking about how people learn. This is like kind of one research-based framework for thinking about how adults specifically learn and how you get people to take action. And so they are awareness, knowledge, and then action. And thinking about like you are probably here in this training and attended these previous webinars because you had some awareness of invasive plants, but you wanted to learn more. So maybe you were in that like first awareness stage, moving into knowledge and hoping to get some knowledge to move you towards action. But I feel like I think it's important to just remember like most of the people in the world are like maybe slightly aware of invasive plants, but probably not. So, there's like the funnel kind of gets a little bit smaller all the way through. And especially when you're thinking about engaging with volunteers, people need to be aware that something's a problem and feel like they have the knowledge and they're empowered to do something about it before they can take action. And volunteering is like a key way to help them along that. But it's important to like keep this in mind when you're thinking about like why would someone take part in invasive plant management? I wanted to share a little bit about some kind of the trends in volunteering. Again, this is the world I spend a lot of my time in, thinking about volunteerism. And, we have a really strong culture of volunteerism in New Hampshire, and most of our conservation land across the state has some professional staff managing it, but there's also a lot of volunteers who care for our trails, our town forests. They serve on their town conservation commission. And the reality is that over the last kind of 30, 40 years, like volunteerism has changed a lot in the country. And there's many reasons for that. A big one is that our culture has shifted. And so for most families, if people are kind of in a traditional family setting, now more women are working in that setting. And so when two parents are working, there's less time for kind of like volunteering that might have been happening in previous, like many years ago, and when our culture was a little different. And we have this vision of these like traditional volunteers who might retire and then look for a dedicated long-term one organization to volunteer with. But again, like that's changing. People are retiring later because they're not able to, or they're not able to fully retire at all. And so people are looking for a variety of volunteer opportunities. They're busy, they want to choose stuff that like interests them and will work with their schedule, and they want to do something that they care about. And mostly people are busy. If you think about like our culture has shifted, I like look, if I'm thinking about picking a restaurant, I Google the restaurant, I look at what it is, I read the menu, I think about the parking, I figure out if it's somewhere I want to go, all before even deciding about going. And the same is true for volunteering. People want to know what to expect before they sign up for something. So they want to know like where do they park? What do they bring? What should they expect? Why does this matter? So keeping all of those things in the back of your head, hopefully like what I'll share in the next couple of slides are some tools that can help you do that. In getting ready for the presentation, I was kind of thinking about three main buckets of like kind of different types of volunteering around invasive plants that I've seen to be most effective. And there's certainly more. Maybe you already serve in some volunteer capacity. Maybe you're on your conservation commission and you have your own ideas for ways to engage volunteers. But these are just three that came, that were in my head. The first being kind of this theme around those first stages of learning. So thinking about how do you help others become aware and knowledgeable about invasive plants. So thinking about sharing what you know about invasive plants with others. I made this settle up, but this kind of like do-it-yourself volunteering. So thinking about how can you help support people to engage in invasive plant management on their own time, and what does that look like? And the third is probably the more kind of traditional volunteer invasive plant efforts, which is around these kind of planned work days or trainings. So first, thinking about that education and outreach bucket, I think there's a lot of people who are not super aware of invasive plants, or maybe have heard a little bit about them but don't know that much. And this kind of volunteering can be really powerful to help people feel like they can do something about it and have the skills and resources to do so. You likely signed up for this webinar because you like had heard a little bit about invasive plants, but you wanted to know more, and maybe you're in those like first two phases. Lots of people are. And a key role you can do is share resources with people about identification and management strategies. I see lots of people, volunteers do a small presentation at the library. They write someone in like my town, I think for a while, was writing a column in our town newsletter that just talked about invasive plants, or shared it on their Facebook page, or maybe you're part of a gardening group. So thinking about, there is like an important piece of this, which is just like, you might not feel like you're a complete expert, but you've learned more than others, and you can share that with the people around you. Another idea that you maybe get inspired from these webinars to want to tackle some invasive plant management, either on your property or on a town conservation land in your area. And you can always just invite people to come look at that. One thing I've seen to be really effective is like, everyone loves to like look at another neighbor's yard and talk to them about what happened. And so you can even do things just as simply as that, as sharing what you know and what you're trying to figure out and what you're trying and testing out with your neighbors. This second bucket of kind of like do-it-yourself volunteering, I think really hits at those people who are interested to help but are super busy, and they have other barriers that might limit their participation in a more formal way. And really, I definitely saw a big rise in this kind of during the pandemic, when we all weren't able to engage in community in the way that we had been before. So there was a lot of interest in this kind of volunteering. I think this is like a growing sphere of volunteer engagement, but and thinking about ways that people can engage in invasive plant management on their own time. But kind of like a newer phase of volunteering, maybe. So one example of something that we've seen to be really effective in this sphere is like, we at Extension ran coordinated something called the Garlic Mustard Challenge for several years. So garlic mustard, several years ago, was a like early detection plant in the Seacoast area. And so we at Extension created some resources around identification, what to do with with pulling it, how to do it, when to do it, and encouraged people to go out and do it on their own. And then report what they did back into a form so we could like see all of our collected impact. And like I never saw those people, I'm just behind the scenes helping, but that was a great way to like give people the skills that they needed to do something, and then people could do it on their own time within a certain window of time. And we were just kind of supporting them on the back end. The creative evolution of that project was something that I saw the Hanover Conservation Commission do. And so they had a lot of garlic mustard growing along the roadsides and in some conservation lands in Hanover. And so at some point they basically had some volunteers who were like more heavily trained and engaged, and they created some signage, including information about identifying the plant and managing it and what to do with it. And then basically they put up those signs at those populations along roadsides and encouraged anyone who walked by to pull the plant. And then those more engaged volunteers would check every day or so and move the sign if it had all been removed from that spot, and gather all the trash and move it to the next spot. So again, it was a great way, like people who were just walking by could participate. They learned about something. Here's a picture that they shared with us of all of the like garlic mustard that was pulled. And so just showing again that like collective impact, it could be something you just help build the supporter framework for, but you encourage individuals to do on their own time. And then like most of what I'll finish like the next 10 minutes talking about are these more traditional kind of volunteer invasive plant management engagement opportunities through work days or trainings. These webinar series I would consider like a volunteer training series. So basically, I had a set time and a location, and I've seen invasive plant management make excellent work days. I've seen them run really well, but I've also seen them like not be so successful. Like I said, volunteers, many hands make light work. But volunteers need support and good planning and leadership to be successful, and to ensure that the invasive plant management that happens is effective and what you want. So the next several slides are some of the things that I've seen that can help ensure a great work day or training. And the first is to be realistic that like not everything can be a work day or training. So just because you find invasive plants on a property doesn't mean that like that's a great place to host a volunteer work day on. There's lots of reasons for that. One is like, is it easy to get there? If you imagine volunteers coming to help you do some invasive plant management, they need places to park. They need, maybe if they're there for an extended period of time, they might need a place to go to the bathroom. Do they have to walk really far to it? Is it like easy to get to? Do you need permission? Whose land is it on? There's questions to consider in terms of thinking about a location for an event. So just keep that in mind. I think the engagement that I've seen go the best is when the location is pretty thought through. And maybe it's like a popular place in your town, and maybe it might not necessarily be the place where the invasives are the worst, but it's the place where the invasives are the most accessible. And you're thinking about it as a way to engage more people in the land. You want to think about teaching people first and then doing it. So adults really we learn best through engaged learning. But you want to make sure that like you include that in your workday. There's nothing that will teach you how to identify a plant like pulling it out of the ground for an hour. So these people will definitely walk away having some knowledge about a certain plant, but they need to learn that on the front hand, and most of them are going to show up not being sure. Many work days, we just would encourage you to plan around having that training component in the beginning and making that very clear to volunteers that that's a built-in part of the workday. People, when we've done some surveying of people who volunteer, the number one thing that they say, the adjective they use to describe their volunteer opportunity, is educational. So people are choosing things because they're excited to learn something new. These pictures are from an invasive plant workday that Extension held several years ago, where our staff on the left spent a lot of time, maybe the first 15 minutes, talking through the identification of the plant. A lot of people aren't comfortable with like what does opposite leaves mean? Like talking through that, showing examples, and then volunteers spent the other like 3/4 of the time removing the invasive plant. Hopefully the pictures in the presentation have kind of gotten this across as well, but I think, invasive plants can feel a little daunting, and the like scale of the issue in New Hampshire can feel overwhelming. But I think the really cool thing about volunteer work days are that they are fun, and you're building community, you're connecting with people, you're taking some action, and people like that, and people love to be social. And so making sure you kind of build that time in, or you're comfortable with that. Maybe it means people work in pairs and one person is pulling and the other person is like putting it in the disposal trash bags that you're using or whatever. But that's like a great way to ensure that kind of community building over time. We've seen a lot of success with volunteer work days for invasive plants when people kind of repeat them over time. So maybe you host them at the same location every couple of years, and then you can really see the impact of what you've done over time. An example of that is Extension's been partnering with the UNH Office of Woodlands for many years to host a buckthorn blitz in College Woods, where like 15 years ago when they started, the buckthorn was almost completely dominant in the understory there. And basically twice a year, we held a work day where students came on Earth Day in the spring, and in the fall, they came for 4 hours and they removed buckthorn. And those first couple of years, it was a little overwhelming, but now you can really see the impact they've had over time. And so maybe you take pictures of that impact and share it back with the volunteers because they want to feel like they've had an impact. This was a picture from a work day we did on the coast where we actually counted every single plant that we pulled because we were trying to track if pulling was an effective management strategy. And which is like a lot of work, but it was also a great opportunity for a volunteer who maybe wasn't as able to participate in the pulling, but could sit there and keep track. And it's another satisfying way to be like, hey, we pulled 500 plants today. And finally, this is like, I put this in here for myself, but I think, that the power of feeling like you've made some difference or some impact is really powerful. And so I also really encourage everyone to like take a group picture at the end of it. This is a picture from that same like pepperweed pull. It has the bags in the front of the plants we pulled, showing some of the joy. I use this picture all the time. I think like this is the kind of picture that would get people to come to a future event because that looks like it was fun. And then I'll just share a few kind of tools and resources that we have at Extension that can help you do these kind of facilitate these kind of work days some more. So the first is some tool libraries that exist. So UNH Extension created 2 stewardship tool libraries. One is in Epping, New Hampshire, and one is just over the border in Norwich, Vermont. That's housed at the Upper Valley Trails Alliance. And these tool libraries include tools that you can borrow. The one in Epping is at SELT, the Southeast Land Trust, and that one's free to borrow tools from. The one at the Upper Valley Trails Alliance in Norwich, they ask that you become a member, which is like I think you can become a member for not too much money, but just to know that. And they include all kinds of tools you might need for invasive plant management. So some specialized tools like some weed wrenches for pulling out really, more of woody shrubs. But it also includes some of the tools for hosting a successful volunteer event, like the sign that you can see in this picture to like encourage people where to park. So there's some great, just to know those exist, and we can share the links afterwards. And you can also, I will say, these tool libraries, as a private landowner, you can request to borrow from them. We generally prioritize work on conservation land. So like if you represented a town, but we won't necessarily deny a request from a private landowner. In thinking about how you get people involved and how do you recruit volunteers, I would say, starting thinking about if you're hosting an event in your community, you actually probably know more than me about how to get the word out there. Maybe it's by posting a flyer at the transfer station, or like my town has our newsletter every month, or maybe it's a town Facebook page. So I think you can kind of first start with that, your community and who you know. And for a more broader audience, I manage a project for Extension called Nature Groupie, which is a website that any organization or community or even business that's holding a volunteer workday, an outdoor volunteer event in New Hampshire, can share their events on our calendar. And then I make a email every week-ish highlighting all the upcoming events and promoting them to our newsletter of about 6,000 people. And so I would say that can be a great way to see what other people are doing too. There's been some really great invasive plant management work days that have been happening with some groups in Massachusetts. So even if you're not sure about something, it's worth like checking out the Nature Ruby calendar and seeing what other groups are doing. You can sign up for the newsletter if you want, and it's always a resource to you if you're looking to recruit volunteers. The team at Extension that worked on Nature Groupie created a series of training guides to help people engage with volunteers. And a lot of what I've talked about in this presentation is part of those. And two of them in particular might be very helpful for you. One is called Invasive Plants in the Granite State. And so that's kind of a like shorter publication that talks about invasive plants in New Hampshire. And it comes with a pre-done PowerPoint presentation for designed for you to just like go out and use if you want to host or teach people about invasive plants. You could always just take it and make it your own or just exactly use it and do the presentation at the library or not. That's a like free download. I can send the link for afterwards, but just to know that's a resource to you. And then the second one that's particularly, I think, of interest is called Workday 101 and includes a lot of these details about how to host a successful volunteer workday. And lastly, I'll just put a plug out there. Again, I can send this in a link afterwards, but we've collected a lot of the resources on Nature Groupie that have to do with working with volunteers, like on one website that's just on what Nature Groupie called Working with Volunteers. So I can send the link for that afterwards. And finally, I'll just say this is my job. So my job is to try to help people feel like empowered to engage with volunteers particularly. And so if you have questions, if you're trying to bounce ideas off of me or you're curious or you want to hear other examples or success stories that might be true from other places, I'm always happy to talk. So you're welcome to call me or email me.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Charlotte and Gabe. We work with the conservation districts. We work closely with NRCS. And I'm not as personally familiar with Nature Groupie up until recently, but a lot of you came to us through Nature Groupie, and their help has been invaluable in spreading the word about this webinar series. So we're going to dive into the Q&A. Thank you for everyone who's been putting questions in the chat. And please feel free to keep on putting them in there if you have any more. We have one question about invasive plants and volunteers regarding potential for injuries, particularly working with tools or the different invasive plants that might be harmful, and just wanting to hear your perspective about that.
Yeah, that's a good concern. I will say the majority of our very common invasive plants are not necessarily like harmful to people in terms of the management strategies that we're doing. There is like one that can be tricky, but that is just not one I would encourage to engage volunteers with on the work. And when it comes to kind of liability and thinking about tools, I will say in general, the laws in New Hampshire are pretty very protective of the owner of the land at the end of the day, recognizing that people are coming on there. There's some organizations who choose to kind of like create a pretty simple waiver that they ask volunteers to sign when they sign up, like making sure that their liability is covered. But in general, I would say the laws that exist in New Hampshire are pretty protective of private landowners when it comes to that kind of thing.
Beautiful. And kind of on the back of that, are there any particular species that you'd recommend starting volunteers on, or definitely not?
Oh, it's a good question. I would say, some are easier. Like mostly volunteers, they can't do herbicide treatment in New Hampshire because, we have you need a pesticide applicator license to be using herbicide on anyone else's property except for your own. And so most of the management we're talking about with volunteers is mechanical. And most of that involves either hand pulling or using a tool to kind of like pull the the plant out of the ground or cutting it in some way. And so I would say plants like pepperweed, like garlic mustard, they have a shorter, smaller root system. They're very easy to pull. And so those make excellent volunteer work days. But I've also seen like the buckthorn blitz happens at UNH. We use what are called these weed wrenches, which are kind of these giant, like they're a metal thing that grabs onto the root of the plant at the base of it, and it helps you kind of have leverage to pull it out of the ground. Of course, it's very fun for UNH students to use those and like really rip some plants out of the ground. So again, I think it can depend a little bit on your audience, but I wouldn't say like I haven't seen any. I think knotweed is probably the only plant that I would say is tricky to do for an invasive plant workday because that one in particular more than like all the invasive plants have this can do this, but knotweed, like any tiny piece of knotweed can really be start to regrow. And so that one I would really probably shy away from just because that doesn't make for the best experience with volunteers. But I think buckthorn, barberry, um, I would say garlic, mustard, pepperweed, which is really a coastal plant, all of those kind of ones. Multiflora rose can be tricky because it has thorns, but otherwise, if you just warn them, people are pretty gung-ho about doing stuff.
Wonderful. Thank you. We have another one which has been answered in the chat, but I'm going to repeat it just for everyone who's not looking at the chat. Can you tell us what the gestation life is for various invasive seeds like bittersweet, glossy buckthorn, honeysuckle, barberry? It would be helpful for planning how long you have to worry about control.
Yeah, Gabe, like I guess kind of shuttled it to extension. I do not know that off the top of my head. And I think some of the species have limited research into them. So I will just say for most of the species, there's not like a very set time that's like, okay, after this amount, if you haven't been adding, the seed hasn't been adding, you're fine. I can point you to some of the like resources. I know we have an extension. I'm not 100% sure if they all have that, but we can share that with you afterwards and you can see. The tricky part is a lot of these plants spread not just by seed, so that's kind of what becomes tricky in terms of like specifically identifying that.
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know myself if there's one source that always lists that information.
Yeah.
I mean, UNH Extension has a lot of really great resources, and I pulled up some just to see if that information was consistently for all species. And it's not really.
Yeah.
Although a lot of those resources do list, how does it spread, some common ways to control it, how to identify it, that type of information. But the specific, like getting into the actual research about the years of seed longevity is.
And some of that's because like they're still new in our system, and this is not like the system where they were natively in. So we don't always know what happens if they're in like a deep winter for 5 years. Like, are the seeds still viable? Because that doesn't exist in the climate they came from. So some of that's because a result of them being introduced here.
Thank you. And when we send out the recording, we will also be sending out any additional information that our presenters have to add. So please feel free to send handouts or links or anything you'd like to share with the respondents. And if you're watching this recording, feel free to reach out to the conservation districts and we'll provide you with that information. We have another question. What replacement native plants are toxic to invaders?
I'm not totally sure what you mean by toxic. There's some resources that we have on extension. I think, a lot of these plants are here and super common because they were very popular landscaping plants. And so a lot of people are looking for replacements for maybe their burning bush that they had in their front yard. And so there is a resource that Extension has that's, a good example of some plants, native plants that we'd recommend to plant instead or in place of that. To my knowledge, there's not necessarily like a native plant that you could plant there that would deter the invasive plants from coming back. The reason they're invasive is they're super hardy and they're going to grow. But we could at least show you those ones that in comparison.
Definitely some plants are allelopathic and they secrete chemicals that will harm or inhibit other species, but more often it is the invasives that are doing that, as opposed to, I don't know of a viable strategy of planting native. I wish it would be nice if
Yeah.
we could do this.
We'll put that on our bucket list. Okay, Gabe, what is soil scarification?
It's a good question. So yeah, I mentioned that foresters like our jargon, so I snuck one in there. Thank you for that question, by the way. It's a technique that's often used in, not often, sometimes used in forestry as a way to get the type of tree species regeneration that you're hoping for. So just like invasives, native plants have their own germination with mediums and temperatures and conditions that they are successful at germinating. The seed falls, if it's a pine seed and it falls on mineral soil, it's much more likely to germinate than if it falls upon those leaf litter. So scarification is a technique to expose the mineral soil. That can be a successful strategy for generating small seeded species like pine. There's different strategies for oaks that strategy would be to drive an oak acorn into the ground a little bit. But scarification is just it's a way to help a small species.
Thank you. And another question for Charlotte about making invasive plant polls fun. If you have any recommendations for creating or just unique ideas that you've seen.
I mean, I will say food always helps. So I bring snacks. That's like a rule we have for all of our workdays extension. Seems silly, but it really does help. I think keeping it short because like sometimes invasive plant workdays can be pretty taxing and physically involved. And so making people, like keep it to like 2 hours. And so people show up, you teach them a little bit about it. They have some time to take action and leave them wanting more. That's like they're more likely to come back if they're not like super tired and exhausted at the end of it. Um, and I think I've seen some great examples of people like sharing back photos. Like people love to see what was done. They like to see the impact over time. So if you're first, keeping track of what grows back, or if you're going to do it again and again, like sharing those photos with the volunteers can be really impactful. I've seen there's been kind of a lot of work that's been done in mass recently where groups train specific volunteers to then lead their own work days. So volunteers are leading the work days themselves. So it's again a way to like spread their expertise. And I've seen that be really successful as well.
Wonderful. And those are all of the invasive species related questions that we have in the chat. Really, thank you so much. And I'm going to turn things back over to Janae.
Yeah, okay. If you guys have any other questions, just feel free to submit them in the chat, and we can always have our presenters just kind of email us their responses and get them back to you. Other than that, we just want to say thanks for everyone for coming and thanks to Gabe and Charlotte for presenting. But other than that, I mean, it's all good. You're free to go.